Ready to go?
Welcome to another episode Out of the Blank podcast. I'm here with Mr. Caleb Moode.
How's it going?
Caleb, tell me a little bit about yourself, and if you want, what do you do professionally?
All right. I am a 26-year-old high school history and criminology teacher by day. And at night, I have my own little YouTube channel that I've started where I just try to do these short little 5-minute videos where my motto is spreading real history one beer at a time. So I drink a couple of beers and talk about either things that are going on today in society or just some old history fact that not a lot of people learned about. That's kind of been, whitewashed from the history books.
It seems like a
So
lot has been left out of the history books that's pretty important. Like, people always consider conspiracy theories, people always consider government projects, all these things that you don't really learn in school. And I was like, if they would have just incorporated this into the actual history books, I would have probably learned a hell of a lot more about my history class.
exactly. And that's the approach that the whole history department at my school takes. We kind of have like the anti-establishment history department is what we're called. But we teach about, we refuse to use history books because they just gloss over and romanticize history. And, there's so many different people's perspectives in history that have been overlooked, whether it be a minority perspective, a women's perspective, anybody, the working class perspective. Most history is told from, when you think about the Revolutionary War, you think about, George Washington or Thomas Jefferson, which they're great people, but you don't learn about the people that were actually in the trenches fighting the war. And that's the perspective that we teach history from.
Yeah, and it seems like the only time you really get that perspective is if you're reading a diary or a journal or somebody that was experiencing that. And honestly, those are the ones that really move me the most. I mean, everyone's known Anne Frank's diary book, whatever. You can read that. It's the same old kind of thing. And not to downplay what she went through, but at the same time, there's so many out there where if you just did a little bit of research on the internet, you could read your own. I read a guy named, I think his name is Jack Churchfield, but he was known as the Nazi sword wielding badass of World War II. And that was because there was pictures of him hopping off these boats that would hit the shore, and he would have a sword with him, a giant Scottish sword. And there was a certain account that he had where his whole team were hit by mortars, and he was the only survivor. And with the ears, like he writes down, like my ears were ringing, and all I did was I picked up my bagpipes and I played, I think it's Coming Home Soon, some type of Scottish song that he knew, and he waited for these soldiers to capture him. Now, hearing his everything he was going through, history books don't tell you that. Like, I would like to know, what was Abraham Lincoln feeling when he got shot in the back of the head? What was happening?
Exactly.
Did he have to piss before it happened? I would love to know these types of things. And you wouldn't think that subtle detail would mean anything, but that's why I'm so pro podcasting, so pro writing in a diary. Do it, because then you could give that to someone that, is a family member of yours, and they can read your history. I would love to read Leonardo da Vinci's diary. I would love to hear what types of things he was thinking about. Did he meet aliens? Is there like a journal that says, on May 5th, I met the aliens for the first time and they showed me a flying machine and now I'm going to start building? I would love to read that. Like, if you could come across a journal, what would you love to find, or who?
Exactly. Like, I guess for me, two things going off of that I've always heard about that has fascinated me would be Eisenhower and Jimmy Carter. Both of them allegedly had interactions with aliens, and we never hear about that unless you watch these small little lesser known YouTube videos about Eisenhower apparently had some kind of alleged meeting with aliens, and Jimmy Carter allegedly had one. What was it, when he was on the campaign trail or something like that? But you never hear about those, and these are just like cool little things about history that get students interested. I want to know about the history of, the first Native Americans that had interactions with Christopher Columbus. What were they thinking when they showed up? Because, there's journal excerpts. This is what I teach the first lesson I cover with my freshman and sophomore history classes is Columbus. Because I ask them the first day when you come in, okay, what have you learned about? Okay, 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue. We always learned about that. And he discovered North America. So right there, it's complete BS right there, because he never set foot on the continental North America. He landed on the islands in the middle of the Caribbean, closest he ever got. And then we go into about how, there's journal excerpts of his own journal that you never read about in a regular history class. But we use Howard Zinn's A People's History of the United States. And it's from a people's perspective. And so he uses this journal entry of Columbus that's talking about how when they first interacted, he said, these naive people, they're the nicest people you've ever met. They come up to us, they gave us items, they gave us gold, they gave us food, they gave us water, because Columbus's men were ready to mutiny on him. And he said, I can use these people, their naivety and their docileness against them. And he said, with 50 men, I could conquer this whole land. And so that's what he was planning on the entire time. And we learn about in regular history classes about, they're wanting to spread God, gold, and geography is what I've always learned about. But what you really don't learn about it was all about it was a new form of imperialism. And then he ended up starting the Atlantic slave trade when he wiped out all the Native Americans. He needed new labor sources. So it's fascinating things that you never learn about, that when you actually take the time to read those primary source documents, you truly learn about.
This is why the Mormons got it figured out, because each one of them keeps a journal basically their whole entire life. So you can look back. I talked to a comedian, Steve Cantwell, and he has journals from his great, in the times of the Indians, where there's just accounts that he can read. And it might be short little excerpts or whatever. But like, I think that's what sucks, is the way society has came, is the fact that now we look at journals as like an emotional thing. And it's like, oh, you got to have feelings. It's like, it's also a great way of logging history besides checking your Apple receipt and seeing how much money you spent on gems and Clash of Clans. Like,
Right.
That's not anything that's going to benefit your grandkids or something. Like, I have cards that I got every single holiday, like Christmas and everything, where I just ask people to circle what they mean and write down something inside of it for me. Don't need to put any money in there. My great grandfather was the best at that. He would leave me these things, and he would tell me about the 20s and these stories and these accounts. And that's just stuff I remember from memory. But when I read these cards and he's no longer with us, I feel like he's telling me things again, stories. And it's a thing I can always open up instead of trying to find it somewhere in the back of my head. Every single day we're experiencing and we're constantly getting information where it just gets shoved in there. Next, something's disappearing. Something's going in the way back where you can never reach it until something happens. And it's like, I don't want to lose something that could be valuable and could mean something to somebody else based on just forgetfulness and age.
That's one of the coolest things. I'm glad you mentioned that. My grandfather used to do the same thing. Every Christmas, he would write the year at the top of the card that he would give us. And one of the last Christmases that he was around, that he was with us, he sat and we just talked about him growing up in like the 20s or the 30s and the 40s. My grandfather, he was this very religious man, very, prim and proper guy. And then hearing about his childhood growing up, he was talking about how he was a crooner, essentially. He used to sing like big band. He was a singer. And then he used to run a underground blackjack kind
What?
of ring
Oh,
way back in the day. And I'm like,
that's
holy
freaking
shit.
sweet, man.
Yeah, like back during like the later eras of prohibition and all of that. And then even after, they used to have like these speakeasies, and he lived in like Indiana. So, they were way back in the middle of the sticks. And he used to do all this kind of stuff. And I'm just like mind blown. And I would have never learned about that if I didn't sit down and have those kind of talks with them. And it was
I,
just mind blowing.
I wonder if people look at musicians and they really try and search for maybe a hidden journal or false. Like, how many times they created like a draft of a song or something that could be worth a lot of money? I know there was a theory a while ago that someone found Michael Jackson's journal and they were trying to sell it for millions of dollars, but ended up being fake. And I was like, imagine coming across somebody that has literally made an impact into society and then read their journal instead of hearing accounts from people. Like, everybody loves Prince. Everybody in the world
Right.
wants to talk about Prince. Well, I heard a guy that was a member of a band called Steel Panther, and
Hmm.
he opened up for Prince, and they would leave their instruments on stage, and Prince came out, picked up their instruments, started playing them, and then when he was done, he grabbed their instruments and he smashed them for the people. And the manager just tosses them $20, like, there you go. And they're like, this is way more than $20, but what are you going to say? It's Prince. And apparently he did that a lot. I'm like, that shows him in a completely different light than how we remember him with Purple Rain or something. But like, it's those accounts. I want to know, what was Magellan thinking when he's circumnavigating the globe and he's like, this isn't Australia. Where the fuck are we? Like, I want to know that type of stuff.
Exactly. Like with Magellan, he ended up dying somewhere in the middle of, I think it was either India. or one of the countries in the Southeast Asia. He ended up getting shot by an arrow by one of the native tribes, and he ended up dying halfway through. So he didn't even make it all the way back. So I would love to read a journal entry where he's like, well, shit, I got shot today. What am I going to do? And like, just what's going through their brain? What kind of processes are they thinking about? What okay, well, what, this is plan B. Did they plan, like, contingency plans did they have for this? And so just things like that, I would love to know about that, unfortunately has been either whitewashed over or lost over time. It's like, dealing with the Civil War. If you're told something about, like the lost cause that the South had, if you're told that long enough over generations and generations of a lie, you're going to end up believing it. People are going to end up believing, like, with the lost cause, it's talking about, it's the South trying to paint themselves in a romanticized view of they were just fighting for their rights to exist, when really it was over the right to own another human being. But over the generations, if you try to tell it long enough, people start to believe that. And then that's where we have the situation we have today in the South.
Is this is where your fascination lies, more on the rights of like the kind of the Civil War and everything too, about how it was two sides divided, where one sits there and stands and says it's all about freedoms and their rights and everything, and the other one kind of stands with, no, it's not, it's against slavery. There's a big slavery issue, obviously, but I think the whole factor is like, there are some things today that are being taken down for what they stood for. Is it bad to take it down, or is it kind of disgracing, I would say, the fact that we're going to let it off with a pass and not teach people the mistakes we've made through history? I look at it as a learning ability. Put a statue up beside it. Put something that's even bigger and better that shows like this happened in our history. Look how far we've come from this point. If we take it down, that's like giving them a pass, saying it's forgiving that, oh, we can just forget that part of history. No, we can never forget that part of history. I think, like I said, every 10 years, something new comes out and it ends up proving the old thing wrong. We end up learning what it means to be a person, women's rights, all these other types of things that start to slowly come. And you're like, how could that ever be a possibility that wasn't a thing? And it's like, because of how severely one mindset we are as people. We have a goal and a task and a progress, and we go this way and we follow rules and regulations without even really truly knowing what they are. I think the easiest way to look through history is not by what's taught in a book, but the education you can teach yourself, or maybe defining it in a new way that we can understand it better as people. Because kids aren't going to sit there and want to listen to the same boring fucking textbook about the Declaration of Independence. Why don't you teach other things like certain movements? Like, I think, what was it, Willem versus Du Bois or something like that? Like those court cases. That was like the most interesting thing in the history class to me, was the fact of like, there's these two sides that are fighting, and you have the experience you have now where that's wrong. And you're like, how is this a thing? How is this even sitting in trial right now? And that's what amazes me about history, is that we've come to this conclusion now, and we've come to this growth. It's like I said, it's a really kind of touchy subject to talk about. Especially just, the whole Civil War movement, the whole whose rights, slavery, all of this is very, very touchy. A lot of people don't want to have. And I'm like, it's a topic that can't be forgotten. It's a topic that can't be glossed over. It's a topic you should talk about and not having to feel like your butthole gets clenched up when you start bringing up the words to it. Everyone has an opinion on it. Hear each other out and see where it goes. I think a lot of things and a lot of issues was we started on a very shitty foundation. The Constitution is meant to put our rights into place, but at the same time, they didn't know everything that we know now. So that makes room for a new Constitution. Don't you think there should be something rewritten?
I 100% agree. I think the Constitution is a living, breathing document, so to speak. It has to evolve as society evolves. And if the founders made those clauses at the end, at the end of the first 10 amendments, to add, state with the reservation of states and all that, it's meant to have uh, changes, amendments when you need it. That's the amendment process. So what I'm saying is, we originally, the nation was set up and allowed slavery to continue. They could have ended slavery if they wanted to, but they allowed it to keep continuing because it was economically viable for the founders at the time. But as time progresses, we ended up adding the amendments that ended slavery. We ended up adding the amendments that makes everyone a citizen, equal citizenship, 14th to 15th amendments. We ended up adding the women's right to vote, and all these different amendments. The Constitution has to evolve as society evolves in order for us to continue, growing as a society. But
Well,
yeah, go ahead.
I have a thought. Do you think, and I'm not a conspiracy theorist, but I do like to entertain the idea of it. But what I started noticing recently with how the world's working, it seems like, I don't want to bring up COVID or any of this type of stuff, but when we kind of fell out of place, out of alignment, or out of whatever this routine we've all gotten used to is the same thing over and over again, does it not seem like now that there's something working in the wings that's trying to bring us back into a place or back to a point? It seems like I've always talked about the government tries its best to split up the people because the people together can actually overthrow the government. Abraham Lincoln said it best: a house divided cannot stand. When we come together, we're able to do immense and amazing things. We're able to conquer, explore, go wherever. We're able to, be creative, be people, be human. But it seems like for so long we've put that all on the back burner, and these little fights that keep getting shown to us through news and media, we just want to keep bickering and bickering and bickering. It's like, why don't it just seems like there's something like a shadow society working in the mix. I'm not saying a new Illuminati. I'm just saying the aspect of, it seems like something's like we need to get their attention at fighting each other again. We need to make sure they split up again, because when the COVID hit, we all were like, what the fuck? I don't want to stay in my house anymore. Like, this isn't fun.
Right.
I'm losing my home. I'm losing everything. And we all kind of came together a little bit. And then suddenly there was this giant race divide. There was this riot divide. And it was all based on things that were getting played in the news. And it happened to do with law enforcement. I'm like, okay, there's an issue, obviously, but is there something that's trying to take our attention away from coming together and trying to stop this system that we've just been living by, which is like, oh, that's the law. Why is that a law? Why are we following this rule and acting like it's the end all be all?
Exactly. And it doesn't sound conspiratorial at all, because that's literally how I teach my class. I teach it from a class perspective, and that's what it is. Is there is a select 1% in this country that has had power, that owns, like today, 90% of the wealth in our country. And every time that they have a threat to their power, they have to use a tool to divide the working class, the middle and lower classes, because there's more of us than there are of them. So they use tools like race to split people up. It's like a divide and conquer strategy. And that began when our country was first founded, or even before. During we can't when we first the first slaves were brought here in 1619, and they were viewed at, there was white domestic servants, or indentured servants, excuse me, and then there was the first slaves, and the indentured servants and the first slaves commingled. And that's a whole chapter in this history, people's history of the United States. And they started to see, okay, we can get out of this and rebel against the elites that are in power, the plantation owners, the business owners. We can rebel because there's more of us than there are of them. And then they started using uh, they coined the use of race, and said, okay, well, you're a white indentured servant, but you can get out of this. You can grow out of this. And after you serve your time, then you can be free. And then, but it's like always like, okay, at least you're not that person down at the bottom. And they're able to split people up by race. And it's been throughout our history, there's been movements of people that have been rising up against the system of class, dealing with the upper elites and the middle and working class. Look at with MLK. Everybody always talks about his March on Washington. But what we don't always know about is that the March on Washington, yes, was for voting rights, but it was also dealing with economic rights and uh, income inequality, dealing with race. And at the end of his life, he was moving towards the Poor People's Campaign. And he was really going to bring together the races against income inequality. He said that's the number one thing that's facing our country today, at the time of his death in 1968. So am I saying it's a conspiracy that he was killed? But it's just like you said, it's like there's this shadowy thing that has always been throughout our nation's history that takes out those people that are like outliers in the machine, you could say, that are trying to go through and really shake shit up, to say for lack of a better term.
Have you ever heard the term "you stand on the wrong side of history"?
Yes, 100%.
I hate that fucking word so much because it's like you're saying that's the wrong side. It's just the side that didn't win. It's not really wrong at all. That goes on both sides of the spectrum at all. The thing is, when we classify as wrong, we classify as being a loser. Doesn't mean they're right. I'm just saying that's not what the thing is. It's about understanding, like we said, about growing as people, knowing more about, oh shit, we probably shouldn't be acting this way towards other people just because of a different skin color. It doesn't make any sense. We need to unite together as people. But when someone says you stand on the wrong side of history, I'm like, I want to go back to that moment in time where that divide was, and see what would have happened if we would have slipped into, like, Back to the Future, where it's an alternate universe. Like, what
Yes,
happens if that other side won? Where will we be? And then that one would be considered the wrong side of history. Obviously, there's a winner and there's a loser. There's someone that's right and there's someone that's wrong. We believe that equalness is right. Somebody else believes that it's wrong. Now, it doesn't mean that they're wrong. It's just that their thinking isn't at a perspective based on certain scenarios that have happened in their life. I love all people, no matter your color, whatever. I'll talk to you. If you want to shoot the shit, let's talk about aliens. Let's do it. But
exactly.
at the same time, when we look at people that sit there and refuse to change, refuse to go about these ways, I look at it just like you look at as older people. Oh, they don't know any better. They've been taught and they've been living for so long. That's true. But when you see people that just don't want to sit there and listen, and they want to sit there and, just go off and, I know what I believe. No, you're not going to change my mind. But they'll spout all their shit and not let you talk. That's where I get upset. I'm like, you're not even trying. You're not even trying just to be a human and talk and understand why people are thinking these other ways. It's all about a perspective. And that leads back to the beginning when we're saying reading somebody's journal. I've read, I one of my first college classes was a Black American history class. I was the only white guy in the room. It was very, very uncomfortable only because of the factors everybody's dead staring at the back of my head, basically. And we're reading the whole syllabus, and it's all white guilt stuff. It's all, 10,000 years a slave, all these types of things that just kept on going. And I'm sitting there like, I'm going to get beat up when I get out of class. And the only reason that stress came off of me was because when we're all introducing ourselves, I'm just like, hi, my name is Robbie. I'm a Capricorn. I like long walks on the beach, and cracked a little joke. And then afterwards, a bunch of the guys came up and goes, we're not going to lie, man. We were getting pretty upset by a lot of that content the dude was reading that we're going to have to read this year. And I'm like, yeah, I could feel the pressure. And I think it's just because it's the way we're teaching it is completely wrong. And that's not educating people on the idea of all of these things that are happening, but it's always got to be super one-sided or super the other sided. Let's talk about both of them. Both races, I would say, have amazing history. I mean, it's not just about peanut butter, and it's not just about the Declaration of Independence. There is so much little shit in there that is monumental, but we consider it little, and then we have to go and find that research ourselves. And you're like, wow, how come this wasn't taught to me by my history teacher?
What is the little clapping emoji that you can add on the text and all that? Or it's just like, that is 100%. That's the main reason I even started this YouTube channel. When the quarantine broke out, I had nothing to do besides teaching online, and that left a lot of time on my hands still. And so I living in Alabama and being a progressive minded person, it's few and far between. And so having those just initial conversations, laying a seed, that's the whole reason I started that channel, just to be able to start a conversation. Because anytime you speak out a lot in the South that doesn't go along with that one narrative, you're anti-God, you're anti-this, you're anti-that, and you're just a heretic almost. I feel like I'm Hester Prynne with the scarlet A on my chest or something like that. But so that's the whole reason I started that, just to have those initial conversations, to say, I just want you to be able to listen. Just hear me out. It may not agree with what you're saying, but if you'll just sit and have a conversation, we're going to find out we may have more in common than we think. And just going off of what you said about your college class, at the school I teach at, it's 95% African American and 5% Latinx. And I am a white as white guy comes. So I'll never forget the very first day when I walked into that class. I'm sitting in class and my students walk in, And it's like you said, it's just like dead silent. They're all just staring at me like, is this fool lost or something? And so the first, I hate icebreakers because they were always so awkward in college when you had to do those icebreaker questions. But it was three truths and a lie. And I'll never forget, it was like something about uh, first one for my family to go to college, first one for my family to leave the state. Um, I love Gucci Mane, and something about I love the NBA. And everybody thought that the lie was I love Gucci Mane. And so I said, I could actually name you every album, every lyric, every song, his whole life. He's like my hero. And they were just like mind blown. And I said, so why did you think that? What did you think? And they were all still dead silent. I said, okay, you're not going to get written up if you just tell me what you think. Just keep it within reason. And they said, we just thought you were some white guy that loves country music. And I was like, well, that's perfect because that's our first lesson on stereotyping.
Judging
Because,
a book by its cover, the reason
all right.
why that's what schools are based on. The whole fact is you associate with people that look like you, act like you, talk like you with similarities. We have a group-minded thinking, but that's taught to us. We're meant to
Exactly.
have this blank experience in comparison with everybody, but our initial need to survive and care is being put on the down burn while this other thing gets lit on the stove or whatever. And if this whole thing is, it's got to be simulate with people that look like you, people that think like you, and associate yourself with like-minded groups. I'm like, that's the whole fucking reason we have a problem in office. It's because you don't want anybody in there saying, no, you can't do that. That's why we have
Exactly.
Congress. Okay, well, everybody's agreeing on the same shit. Where's the one person that brings up, well, we can't build that mine next to the school because that'll affect the children. What do you mean? It's money though. We're not those kids. It's like, no, you can't do that. We don't have anybody that's throwing in that voice. And if it is somebody, they end up getting shoved under somewhere where it's like, no, we don't need you in the meeting today. It's like, hang on a second. We need those refuting opinions so we can balance out and understand both sides of what's the good and what's the bad. What are we gaining and what are we losing here? Because if we're
And
losing anything, then it's not probably worth diving into.
and that's what we've lost in just in politics in general. Like, even when I was growing up, it was, it was the end of the Bush years, and then Obama started to run when I was in high school. And, it was John McCain and Obama. And I'll never forget there was a debate where John McCain was talking. He did a town hall, and this lady said, well, I can't vote for Obama because he's a Muslim. And John McCain stopped her and said right there, he said, what if she is? He's an American. He is a great human being. And thirdly, so what if he is? Like that. And it's just like, where is that decency in politics? And John McCain, he wasn't perfect, no. But it's like, back then, senators and congressmen, even if you're a Republican and a Democrat, we can disagree economically. That's fine. But when it comes down to social issues about dealing with human rights, is like where it's just become such a big divide. Back then, you could be a Democrat and a Republican and disagree on the House floor or the Senate floor, and then after you got off, they'd go get a beer together. What happened to that? It's like we've lost the decency in this country to be able to compromise and even hear each other out. To where it comes down to we have literally 30 million people that lost unemployment benefits through no fault of their own, and now they don't know how they're going to pay their rent now because in the Congress they can't get their fingers out of their ass and just get things going, and they can't even come to begin to even try and compromise.
Have you ever
And
heard
it's the people at fault, or it's the people that are suffering.
have you ever heard of Gavin McInnes?
The name sounds familiar.
He kind of comes off as like a hardcore right, like, the stereotype you would consider. But I've listened to a lot of his things, and I think his whole gig is about getting kind of people riled up to go look at his stuff. But he brought up a good point about racism. He said that it didn't exist, which that's not true. But the matter of the fact of, he brought up an example of if somebody's in a bar and they're watching a football game, let's say, if, Eagles or something. If you're watching a Philadelphia Eagles game and some guy sitting beside you, you're not looking over at him, says, oh, I fucking love the Eagles. And then you turn and you notice it's a person of a different color. Is that person going to ignore that conversation and that entertaining, banter of having fun and talking about how amazing the Eagles are because of the color of their skin? And it made me think that there's these similarities that we connect over where that thing gets, like you said, Gucci. When you brought that up, everybody could connect with you on a level. They brought down the stereotype. Let's get to the point in our history and our society today where we can just walk out onto the street or something and not see the race barrier, not see that's the first thing we notice. Let's look at like my cousin, for instance. He collects so much fucking shoes. You don't need that many shoes. Every paycheck is like, I'm buying $50, $500 shoes, buying all this. His whole closet is just stacked up with shoe boxes. He only wears like one pair, and that's the weird thing. He just collects them. But as soon as we walk out onto the street, he knows him. He goes, "Look at that person's shoes." I'm like, huh. Like, I'm just looking. I'm like, you're observing things that a lot of people don't, which is the fact of you're looking at something that a lot of people really don't realize is there, or it's the second thing they look at. It's like when you stare at a woman's chest and you look up, like, oh, that was the first initial reaction. Guys do it, but it's the factor of this is how you're being programmed a little bit. I'm like, that race barrier is there too. The whole factor is you first thing you judge is somebody, you look at somebody, you go, oh, they're a different skin color. And then you might be like, oh, why did I even think that? That's the thing we need to kill. That's the thing we need to terminate out of our brains is this factor of it doesn't matter what skin color you are. I mean, when I got that African American history class, it was the whole factor of my guidance counselor said, there's this class available that'll get you your credits to graduate. Then you can wait a couple months and take next semester. You can take this class and you'll still get the credits and you'll be more comfortable. I'm like, why would I be more comfortable in that class? And you're like, oh, because it's not this class. And it's like, so you're saying I'll be uncomfortable because I'll probably be the only white person in that class? And they're like, yeah, well, I mean, you know, you understand what I'm saying, right? And then I'm like,
Oh, 100%.
I'm sitting there. Well, that's what the guidance counselor said to me was,
Oh, yeah, yeah.
you understand what I'm saying, right? I'm sitting there. I'm like, I don't understand what you're saying. I really don't, because I mean, I've every class I've ever been in, there's been majority of black people in my class. So I don't know what you mean by uncomfortable. But then I got in there and I started realizing a lot of the stuff that was going on, especially when you're all by yourself and there's everybody around you that's kind of different. You're sitting there like, and that really brought him to the point of The Blind Side when he starts reading off the kid's journal because he's smart and everyone thinks he's just dumb and doesn't want to talk. And he starts talking about everywhere I look is white walls, white this, white that. I'm like, that's what sucks, is that we have this plane of thinking where we have to judge and capitalize on the difference rather than coming together. And obviously there's situations I'm never going to understand. I'm never going to understand what it's like to be black. I'm never going to understand what it's like to be Asian. I'm never going to understand what's like this. And all. Everybody's got their own stereotypes. But at the same time, I can connect to you on a level where we're human. We're together. You might have different issues than I have different issues, but doesn't mean I can't sympathize with you.
Exactly, and that's what I tell my students right after we have that, 3 truths and a lie exercise. I sit there and I tell them, "I will never understand what it's like to be where you come from, what it's like to be you. I will never understand that no matter how hard I try. But that doesn't mean I don't want to listen, that I won't be an ally, and that I won't empathize with you. Because I want to be able to show you that I care, that I know that there's messed up things in society, but I'm going to be there for you." And one of my students, I'll never forget, it was like literally a 15-year-old student sits there and tells me that from the minute he wakes up, he has a target he feels like on his back from the minute he wakes up to the minute he goes to bed each night. And it's one of those, oh, I had one of those oh shit moments, like, wow, I never will know what that's like to do that. And he said, just going through everyday life. And then I have people that sit there that come from where I grew up. I tell them where I'm teaching, and they're like, oh, well, God bless you for teaching there. And I'm like, it is God bless me, because I am blessed to be in that situation with such amazing students, because that those students would go through a wall for me and I would do the same for them. And it's literally like a family there, and those people don't understand that. And then because they are terrified to get outside of their little bubble that they've created for themselves, constructed for themselves. And it's just like, it's the most rewarding experience to see students feel empowered. And that's the main goal for me as a teacher. I don't care if you know a date in history. I want you to be able to take skills that you've learned about and empower yourself and empower the community around you to force change, not just ask for change, but demand change. And that's the most rewarding feeling that you can have as a teacher.
If I had to ask you, if you had to pick a moment in history that you really enjoy and you learned something new that you wasn't taught, what would it be?
Oh, 100% Reconstruction. everybody always talks about the Civil War, but Reconstruction was that time period in history that was could have been a major watershed moment. And we could have gone so far, but yet it was upended by, it was the different economic interest, and then the Klan came around to try and counteract those differences. Right then, at the ending of slavery, we had a lot of federal intervention in the South that was forcing change. That was the moment where African Americans had the most representation in Congress ever. They had the most voting power, the most governors ever. And it could have been a time for true equality and equity at that. But then different things counteracted. You had the Jim Crow laws that ended up being passed. You had the North in 1877 kind of was like, we're tired of this. So we want to be able to win the presidency again. So we'll take the federal troops out. And then they were allowed all these loopholes that essentially allowed slavery in a different form to continue, with Jim Crow laws, convict leasing, which was a huge major thing, which is something I focused my thesis on in my graduate school, dealing with convict leasing in Alabama. It's, they passed these bullshit laws like vagrancy laws, and if you were caught jaywalking, you would be arrested and all of that. And then it's right after slavery, and most African Americans didn't have IDs. They were just literally kicked off the plantation. So they don't have a home, they don't have ID. And if you can't produce that, you get arrested. And then if you can't pay your fines for the court cost and all that, you go to prison. And then the prisons would lease out the prisoners for a year lease to these different major businesses and iron ores and mining companies. And then the companies have those people as essential slaves for a whole year, and they're making profit off of them. But the people that are working have no say so, they have no rights and all that, and they were just expendable. And so this happened from the 1870s up until the 1930s in the South. And it's just like, then Jim Crow happened. Then all the different segregation laws. Then after that ended in the 1960s, you had mass incarceration starting with the bullshit drug laws, the war on drugs and all of that. And it's just like one thing after another after another. And it all stemmed back from Reconstruction. It could have been a truly, I guess for lack of a better term, game changer in our nation's history, where we could have truly reconciled with slavery. And like you said earlier, until we as a society can have those moments of acknowledgement and just have a societal acceptance of what happened, and not, well, it happened, but it's over with, so let's just forget about it. No, you have to acknowledge it first before you can ever move on as a society. You can't just sweep it up under the rug. Literally, it's about hearing other people's experiences and their perspectives. And that was a good tangent, but just it all stemmed from Reconstruction.
I'm curious, what do you have on that orange notepad?
Oh, the orange notepad?
Yeah.
Oh, well, I just wanted to have little highlights of things I wanted to make sure to mention as we were talking.
Yeah, welcome to Out of the Blank. It's usually just random. But no, I think that was important when I saw that there. I was like, obviously, it's about getting a message out of here, too, because there is a thing where we're kind of, as people, we're just, I mean, I get it. Everybody's trying to survive. Everybody's trying to get to the next day. Everybody wants to be famous. Everybody's trying to do this. And everybody just wants life to be as easy as possible. Well, life's meant to be fucking hard. But we make it even harder when we go and fight against ourselves. And there's an issue, obviously, that we need to fix. There's things that in our society we need to learn to change. History is something that will never be forgotten because it's our history, obviously, but also keeping track, our experiences, things that we're remembering, like, coronavirus is going to be taught in history classes now. That was a big thing.
Mm-hmm.
It's probably changed our society forever now. And I don't want to stick onto that subject because it's the fact of everybody podcasting talks about it. But what me and you just talked about this whole podcast, a lot of people would not want to dive into that, wouldn't even want to touch that topic. And I think that's an issue. I think the fact is you need to talk about it. It needs to be brought up. It needs to be taught more. It needs to be educated. It needs to be thrown out there. And it shouldn't be a stigmatized conversation, because once you stigmatize it, you're never going to be able to fix it. It's like politics. Why every time somebody says, you don't talk about at dinner politics? It's like, why? Because it turns into an argument? Why the hell you let it turn into an argument? Talk about it. Let it figure out everybody's perspective. You grew up in a completely different state than I've grown up. We're going to have two completely different life experiences. So let's share those experiences and see why the other person thinks that way. I'll deny I mean, I think the only time I almost debated somebody out of all the times I've recorded was a teacher that talked about that kids shouldn't get free school lunches. And I was like, hang on a second. I've been to school and I've needed free lunch because I didn't have one. So I got to fight you on that. And then I started realizing, oh, you're a private school teacher where that makes sense that you think that way. I'm used to going to public school. He goes, yeah, if kids are flying in on helicopters or getting limoed into school, they shouldn't have to get a free lunch. They should, their parents should provide them with one. They obviously have the money. I'm like, that makes more sense. But it's about getting to that point, not letting that turn into a fight. I sat there and I listened and I figured it out. I crossed the lines in my brain. You need to do that more often, and it's not getting done, sadly. So I'm wondering, what would you suggest would be a fix for a lot of the issues that are taught in history? I mean, you as a teacher, what have you made or changed to show the kids that that way of learning history from a different teacher or whatever the teachers taught before you is not the right way, because they're just teaching you straight from a textbook? No teacher has gotten anywhere which is teaching me, all right, turn to chapter 7. We're going to learn about this right here. And then bam, and you start reading paragraph to paragraph. You have to legit capture my attention. My history teacher in 11th grade said, my name is Robbie Robertson, so my initials are RR. He goes, R&R. Rest and relaxation. What are you doing back there? And I'm sitting there with my head down like, what? He goes, it's because you rest and relaxing, brother. And I'm like, oh my God, like, yeah, I get it. And it was that entertaining thing. Like, teachers never actually focused on me and not berate the shit out of me, but the fact of connect with me on like a human level. Like, what's up? Like, yeah, I'm here to help you, not hurt you.
And it all starts from literally the first moment that the students walk through the door. And from the moment they walk in the door, they know what they're expected to do, and it's a welcoming environment. I have music playing from the time they walk in until the time we start class. And, I take suggestions from my students. I want them to feel like they are just as invested in this class as I am. They're not going to walk into my class for 50 minutes. I'm going to lecture to them and they're going to leave. They're going to be bored. I'm going to be bored. We get nothing out of it. From the minute they walk in, they know to pick up what we're doing that day, go to their desk, and I usually have some kind of journaling activity where it talks about something going on in the world today. And then for the first 5 minutes, we watch Trevor Noah from the night before because I love Trevor Noah. So anything he talked about the night before, we watch that on YouTube. I never thought I'd be able to do that as a teacher, but I love it. I literally get to make dad jokes and talk about history all day. It's great. And so then it's discussion based. I want to hear their perspective and what they think on things. So we all have tables in my classroom. So they're in groups of 4, and they get to debate things back and forth over a topic. Like, let's say if we're reading some kind of journal entry or something like that, they read it in their groups and then they get to discuss it. And then we have a class-wide discussion. So we do the lectures the night before. I'll have like a pre-recorded lesson that they'll listen to and take notes on, and then we have discussion questions about major topics that we can get into, because I want them to feel empowered. And for instance, like with Columbus, we did like a day of discussion on him, but then we spent 4 days coming up and putting Columbus on trial. We put the system of empire on trial, and then we put Columbus's men on trial, and then we actually put the actual Arawak and Taino Indians on trial. So I split the students up into, okay, where you're the defense, you're the prosecution, you've got to come up with the entire court case, everything. So, and I showed them how to set up the trials and all that, and that was like the most entertaining and greatest thing I've ever had in a class, because they got into it. They had to come up with opening statements, cross examinations, and then I had a jury that set out and they listened to all the cases, and then they had to decide on everything. And it was just, when they're able to get interactive and they're able to have hands-on activities, I noticed that the buy-in is so much higher because they're able to make connections. And then I noticed at the end we had some discussion after all the trials took place, and they're making connections to different things that they have had happen in their own lives, dealing with different different family members that have been in court or things that they've heard about. They made connections to like the Trayvon Martin case and all of that. And I mean, this is, 500 years of history, A, and B, I have 14 and 15-year-old freshmen and sophomores that are making these connections, and it's just like mind blowing. And that's the kind of history class that I want.
Making it more interactive so the students are not just sitting there getting speeched at the whole entire time, where when the point or the thing does come up, does anybody have any questions, they're not just like quiet, they're going to ask a question. My eighth grade teacher, history teacher, I'll always remember, not only because she was super hot, shout out to Miss Meddy if you're listening. I was just saying, you knew it, you come on now, she was young, but she did a thing where it was a debate, kind of putting people on trial, like a mock trial case, I would say. So you had historical figures that were brought to trial, and my character was
Hmm.
Benjamin Franklin. I'm like, he's on the $100 bill. She's like, do more research. There's going to be some stuff you're going to find out about him that might change the way you think about history. And she was right. I found out that not only did he discover a way to use electricity or develop electricity, but the factor of he had bodies in his basement, literally. He was doing, and I was like, wait, bodies in the basement. Hold on a second. Is that a conspiracy theory? No, he would take corpses from graves and he was testing them in a basement. He was doing lab experiments on the
Hmm.
decomposition rates of the bones and also the cells. And I was like, holy shit. So now every time I look at a $100 bill, I was like, this guy had bodies in his basement and nobody really knows why. That's just the theory that he was doing that. He could have been killing people. We have no clue. But it makes you really want to look and search and try and find an answer. And it makes you want to connect to something too. Like, what is that like? Is that like, oh, it's like when I saw that episode of Dexter. Oh, then the next thing the door opens up and learning starts to happen.
Exactly. And like I teach a criminology elective for seniors, and we went on a field trip to the Legacy Museum in Alabama in Montgomery, dealing with the Lynching Legacy Museum of lynchings in the South. And while we were there, some of my students saw that in Alabama, on the state constitution, it's still technically legal to have segregated schools. Even though Brown v. Board ended school segregation in 1954, technically on the Alabama Constitution, it's still legal to segregate schools. My students were enraged about that. It's like, it's 2019. At the time, it was 2019. And so, literally, it was an hour bus ride back. Within that hour bus ride back, they had come up with a petition. They had organized themselves, and they had completely drawn up the petition to uh, have that taken off the state constitution. And so I was like, okay, y'all took this over. They felt empowered to do that themselves. And within a week, they had over 1,000 signatures. We had met with a state representative, a Democrat and a Republican state representative came together, which is shocking in Alabama. And then they agreed to have it put on the docket to have it removed from the state constitution back in the spring session, but then coronavirus happened and everything shut down. But it's like that little instance, it showed them that their voice matters. Their voice has power, and especially when it's all collectively put together. And it's the most, I guess it's the most amazing thing to see. These students, they're 17, 18-year-old seniors, and they're organizing themselves, and they felt empowered to do that. And that's like the greatest thing to ever feel as a teacher. And it's just amazing. They took a lesson that they learned just from a field trip, and they were able to enact real change in their own community that affects them, even if it is technically, was still already made illegal, but still just to have that stain on our state's constitution taken away. So it was amazing.
It takes one obstacle to unite us, but it also takes one to divide us. I'd rather
Exactly.
be united than divided.
Exactly. And that's the main thing that I try to teach. We have more alike than different. And the power of the people is stronger than the power of individuals.
So please, I mean, I appreciate your time, dude. Seriously. Like, I know this was like one topic where like, all right, I have a message I want to get across, but at the same time, you didn't really know what you're walking into. But seriously, you've done a lot. And I think this is a topic that people are going to hear, people are going to listen to. And the main thing is, obviously, it's our opinions and it's our thoughts too. But there's a serious thing that we need to work on is being united as people again. I mean, the factor is we're lost. I feel like we're the guy with our thumb out looking for a hitchhike, trying to get a ride or something, because we've just been programmed for so long of this way we need to go and not focus on real initial change, because it's so hard to make change into our own lives with trying to make a little bit of something for ourselves. We've turned into this Wolf of Wall Street set mind thinking where I got to step on the throat of someone beside me to get to the top. And it's like, there's a way we can equal climb. There's a way we can rise and bring all of each other up by just talking to each other, by being a person again, by opening up the door. Let's bring that back. I haven't seen that in freaking forever. And when you do open up a door, please say thank you to the person that opened up that door to you, and then you're welcome. Don't just be like, open up the door. I literally will make you walk
Crazy
back
concept,
outside.
right?
I know. I'll make you walk back outside. I'll be like, excuse me. And they're like, what? And I was like, you didn't say thank you. And they're like, okay. And I'm like, you're welcome. Like, you gotta, that's just something that can't be neglected. Even that little simple thing. It's something as simple as that can make a huge change, man.
Exactly. And it's just being able to have those initial conversations. And one of my favorite quotes from Bobby Kennedy, I'm going to paraphrase. He's like, history and major change happens in those initially awkward moments. You have to have those initially awkward conversations, because once you do that, you're able to find commonalities. And when you find commonalities, you're able to actually enact change, because you are able to collectively join together. And that, until we as a society can do that, we have to be able to have those conversations and see each other as human beings, not adversaries.
Well, please promote your YouTube channel, man. I want people to be able to find your work as well, man. And I appreciate you for coming out and doing the podcast and giving me your time today.
I greatly appreciate it. First off, this has been amazing. I have greatly enjoyed it. And like you said, it was last minute, and that's what I think made it so great, is we were able to just discuss things off the top of our head. But yeah, it's In the Mood, Moode for Real History. I'm a lover of puns. But yeah, definitely we talk about history, we talk about real life, and just one beer at a time. So I would greatly. It's on YouTube, Apple Podcast, and Spotify.
And I'll make sure I link
So
everything in the description so people can find the work. And thank you so much for listening to this episode Out of the Blank podcast, and stay tuned for our next episode.